You brought that fat devil into our valley, and now look at us." Martha Hadley's scream tore through the April air like a saw through green wood. "Our fields are dead. Our mill burned. My boy's skin is burning with fever. Your daughter did this." The accusation didn't land on the pastor. It landed where the crowd wanted it to land, on the woman standing in the center of Ashford's mill, her wrists already red from rope, her dress smeared with mud from hands that had shoved and pulled her as if she were a sack of grain. Constance Merriweather kept her chin lifted even while her heart thudded like a trapped bird. 31 years old, a school teacher from Philadelphia, she had come west chasing something simple, a place where her mind mattered more than her body. Instead, she stood here at 415 pounds, made into a spectacle, proof, they claimed, that God had marked her wrong. Pastor Aldrich stepped forward with a worn Bible in one hand and a page of scribbled testimony in the other. His voice was practiced, the kind that could turn fear into certainty. "Constance Merriweather," he declared, "is accused of bringing a curse upon this town. Since her arrival, our crops have failed, our mill has burned, and our children have fallen ill. Her unnatural size itself is a sign of wickedness. Gluttony invites darkness, and darkness invites ruin." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Men who had lost money and pride nodded as if nodding could fix weather and fire. Women who had feared sickness in their homes clutched their shawls tighter and stared at Constance like she carried death in her pockets. "That's not true," Constance said, and she hated that her voice trembled. "I've read to your children. I've cleaned their cuts. I bought medicine with my own wages." "Exactly," Martha snapped, pointing hard enough to shake. "You were close to him, close enough to poison him." Constance looked from face to face and realized, with a chill deeper than the spring wind, that reason would not save her. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a name they could spit out and feel for one brief moment that the world was under control. Pastor Aldrich lifted his hand. "Put her in the stocks until sunset, then drive her out." The first rotten apple struck Constance's shoulder before the planks even closed around her wrists. And then, just as the town's cruelty found its rhythm, a single gunshot cracked the air, so sharp, so final, that every voice died at once. From the tree line, a man stepped into view, tall as a split pine, broad as a barn door, dressed in buckskin and bearskin, a rifle steady in his hands as if it had always belonged there. "Let her go," he said, calm as winter. Silence gripped Ashford's mill so tightly that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The mountain man stood unmoving at the edge of the square, his rifle lowered but ready, his presence alone enough to bend the will of men who had moments earlier felt brave in a crowd. Up close, Constance could see how enormous he truly was. He had to be nearly 6'10", maybe more, built not with the soft bulk of prosperity, but with the dense strength of a man shaped by cold, hunger, and danger. His buckskin coat was scarred and weather-darkened. 2 pistols rested at his hips, and a second rifle was slung across his back. His beard was black and thick, streaked faintly with silver, framing a face cut sharp and hard as if carved from mountain stone. But it was his eyes that unsettled the town most. Pale gray, almost silver, eyes that did not ask permission or seek approval. "Town business," Pastor Aldrich said again, though the word sounded weak even to his own ears. "You have no standing here." The mountain man's gaze swept over the crowd, over the men who had thrown filth, over the women who had spat scripture like knives, over the children who stared with wide, frightened eyes. "I've been standing in your schoolyard for weeks," he said, "listening, watching. That gives me all the standing I need." He turned his attention to Constance. She was bent forward in the stocks, her shoulders trembling now that the shouting had stopped. Dried mud streaked her sleeves. Her hair, once neatly pinned for teaching, had come loose and clung to her flushed face. At 415 pounds, she had learned to make herself small in public, to fold inward so others would feel less offended by her existence. Today, that instinct felt like a betrayal of herself. Still, she lifted her head and met his eyes. Something passed between them then. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. "She's not a witch," the mountain man said. "She's a teacher. I heard her read Latin to your children. I watched her spend her own money on medicine for a boy none of you could be bothered to sit with after dark." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone shifted uneasily. "The frost?" Aldrich pressed. "The mill fire?" "Weather," the mountain man replied flatly. "Carelessness and scarlet fever spreading through the valley whether you like it or not. But blaming God or sickness won't give you back your crops, so you chose her instead." He took a step forward, boots heavy, final. "You chose her because she's large, because she's alone, because you thought no one would bleed for her." That did it. Fear crept into faces that had worn righteousness minutes before. The men holding the stock's hinges hesitated. "I said," the mountain man repeated, voice low and deadly calm, "let her go." The pastor opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to pray, but the rifle rose just enough to make the decision for him. The stocks opened. Constance's legs buckled instantly. 6 hours locked bent forward had stolen all strength from them. She pitched sideways, breath leaving her in a sharp cry. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The mountain man held her with unexpected gentleness, one massive arm braced behind her back, the other steadying her weight as if he'd done this 1,000 times before. "I've got you," he said quietly, meant only for her. "Take a breath." She did, shallow, shaking. Up close, she could smell him. Pine smoke, leather, cold air, not unpleasant, grounded. "What's your name?" she whispered. "Silas," he answered. "Silas Blackwood." The name struck the town like a hammer. Someone gasped. Another took a step back. Silas Blackwood was not folklore. He was fact. A mountain man who traded once or twice a year and vanished back into the Cascades. A man rumored to have survived things that killed others twice his size. Silas straightened, keeping Constance close as if she belonged there. "She's leaving with me," he said to the town. "Anyone who follows won't make it home." No one moved. Silas shifted his grip and, with a smoothness that stole Constance's breath, lifted her fully into his arms. All of her weight. No strain, no show. For the first time that day, she felt something other than fear. She felt safe. As he carried her toward the trees, the town parted without a word. The jeers were gone. The stones stayed on the ground. Behind them, Ashford's mill shrank back into itself, small, frightened, and suddenly aware of its own cruelty. Ahead lay the mountains, cold, dangerous, and somehow, for the first time since she arrived in Oregon, full of possibility. The forest swallowed Ashford's mill within minutes. Pines closed in, their tall trunks filtering the fading daylight into long blue shadows. The sounds of the town, voices, accusations, hatred, fell away behind them, replaced by wind in the branches at the steady crunch of boots on earth. Silas carried Constance without hurry, as if time itself bent around his pace. Her head rested against his shoulder, her body heavy with exhaustion rather than weight. Every jolt of movement sent pain through her back and legs, but she did not complain. She was afraid that if she spoke, this fragile safety might dissolve. After nearly half an hour, Silas stopped near a creek and gently lowered her onto a fallen log. "Rest," he said. "We're not far, but you've had enough for one day." Constance nodded, breath shallow. Her wrists throbbed where the wood had pressed into her skin. Her shoulders burned. Worse than the pain was the aftershock, the quiet terror that comes once danger has passed, when the body finally understands what almost happened. Silas knelt in front of her and poured water from his canteen, holding it steady while she drank. His movements were practiced, respectful, never rushed. "They called me cursed," she said softly, staring at the stream rushing past, like I was something contagious. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he wrapped a thick wool blanket around her shoulders, tucking it in as if he'd done so 1,000 times before. "People fear what they don't understand," he said, "and when fear mixes with hunger or loss, it turns ugly fast." She nodded. "I thought leaving Philadelphia would save me from judgment. I was wrong." "You weren't wrong," Silas replied. "You were brave. That counts for something." When she could walk again, he helped her to her feet. She leaned on him without shame now, her arm barely circling his massive back. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher, the air growing colder, cleaner. Snow lingered in shaded hollows despite the season, and the ground sloped sharply enough that Silas slowed, watching every step. As dusk settled, the trees thinned. Ahead, smoke curled into the evening sky. "There," Silas said. "Home." The cabin stood tucked against a rocky rise, sturdy and wide, built of thick logs darkened by years of weather. A stone chimney rose from one side, firelight glowing warmly through the small windows. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, the kind of place meant to endure. Silas opened the door and guided her inside. Warmth wrapped around Constance instantly. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Shelves lined one wall, stacked with jars, tools, and, she blinked, books. A heavy wooden table dominated the center of the room, scarred from years of use. Everything smelled of wood smoke and herbs. Silas eased her onto a chair padded with folded furs. "Sit," he said. "I'll get stew." She watched him move about the cabin with quiet efficiency. He ladled food into a bowl, tore bread with his hands, and set everything before her. "Eat slowly," he said. "Your body's been under strain." The stew was rich and simple, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. As she ate, the tension she'd been carrying since Ashford's mill finally began to loosen. "Why do you live this far out?" she asked. Silas sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "Peace. Fewer people." She smiled faintly. "I'm beginning to see the appeal." After she finished eating, fatigue claimed her completely. Silas led her to a bed, built wide and low, layered with furs and thick blankets. "You'll sleep here tonight," he said. "I'll take the chair." "That's not necessary," she murmured. "It is," he replied, gentle but firm. "Rest." As she lay back, exhaustion pulled her under quickly. But before sleep fully claimed her, she heard him speak again, quieter this time. "You're safe here, Constance. No one will hurt you." For the first time in months, she believed it. Outside, night settled over the mountains. Inside, firelight flickered, holding back the dark. Morning arrived gently in the mountains, not with bells or shouting, but with light filtering through the small windows and the quiet murmur of wind moving through pine needles. Constance woke slowly, disoriented at first by the unfamiliar ceiling beams above her. Then memory returned, not all at once, but in fragments. The shouting, the stalks, the gunshot, the steady arms that had carried her away. She shifted and realized she was warm, truly warm. Thick furs covered her from shoulders to feet, layered with care rather than tossed on as an afterthought. For a moment, she simply lay there, breathing, listening to the fire crackle softly nearby. She had not slept this deeply in years. When she finally sat up, her body protested, stiff and sore. But the pain was dull now, no longer sharp. A folded dress lay on the chair beside the bed, clean and mended. Her old one, she realized. The torn seam at the shoulder had been carefully stitched. Even the buttons had been reinforced. Silas was already awake. He stood at the table, slicing bread with deliberate movements, his broad back turned to her. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, forearms thick with muscle, and faint scars that told quiet stories. "You didn't wake me," Constance said. He glanced over his shoulder. "You needed rest. Sit. I'll bring food." She did as she was told, wrapping a shawl around herself. Breakfast was plain: bread, eggs, dried fruit. But it was more than she had eaten most mornings in Ashford's mill, where she'd often skipped meals to save her wages for books and supplies. Afterward, Silas showed her the cabin properly. He moved slowly, mindful of her pace, never making her feel like a burden. There was a bathing room he'd built himself, with a large tub and a system of buckets and pulleys to heat water from the fire. A pantry stocked with jars of preserved meat and vegetables. A small desk by the window with paper, ink, and more books than she'd seen in any frontier home. "You read?" she asked, surprised. "I did," he said. "Long time ago. Haven't forgotten." Over the following days, a rhythm settled between them. Constance recovered gradually, her strength returning as bruises faded from angry purple to yellow and then disappeared entirely. Silas never hurried her. When she needed to rest, he simply nodded and adjusted his plans. She began helping where she could, organizing shelves, sweeping floors, cooking meals that went beyond simple survival fare. She added herbs to stews, baked bread properly, and insisted on setting the table like it mattered. "It does," she said when Silas raised an eyebrow. "Meals should feel human." He accepted this without argument. In return, he taught her the mountain, not all at once, and never cruelly. He showed her how to read the sky, how clouds changed shape before snow, how silence in the forest could mean danger. He adjusted tools to fit her hands, built a sturdier stool so she could sit while chopping vegetables, and reinforced the bed frame without comment. What struck Constance most was what he did not do. He did not stare at her body as if it were a problem to be solved. He did not apologize for it or pity it or pretend it wasn't there. When he helped her up a step or offered his arm on steep ground, it was practical, not patronizing. At night, they sat by the fire. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they sat in silence that felt companionable rather than awkward. Silas told her about the mountains, about winters so harsh the world seemed to vanish, about trapping roots and storms that rewrote the land. She told him about Philadelphia, about classrooms full of restless children, about books she loved and lessons that made young minds light up. about how she'd learned, very young, that being a large woman meant the world believed it had the right to comment, to judge, to decide what she deserved. "I thought I was past letting it hurt," she said one evening, "but that town reminded me I never truly was." Silas stared into the fire. "People like that don't change. They just find new targets." "Then why did you change?" she asked quietly. He looked at her then, really looked, as if weighing whether to answer. "I didn't," he said. "I just stopped pretending cruelty was normal." Weeks passed. Spring turned into early summer. The land greened, and Constance found herself laughing again, a sound that startled her the first time it escaped. She sang softly while cooking. She began teaching Silas mathematics in the evenings, scribbling numbers on paper while he listened with surprising focus. "You're patient," he said once. "Most teachers I knew weren't." She smiled. Children learn best when they aren't afraid. Something shifted between them then, not abruptly, quietly, the way snow melts, not with noise, but with inevitability. Silas began bringing her small things, a carved spoon that fit her hand perfectly, a blanket thicker than the others for colder nights. Once he returned from checking traps with wild flowers tucked awkwardly into his pocket, clearly uncertain what to do with them. She placed them in a jar and said nothing, letting the gesture speak. For Constance, the greatest change came from within. The shame that had clung to her like a second skin began to loosen. In this cabin, she was not the fat woman, the witch, the curse. She was simply Constance, a woman who cooked, taught, learned, and was treated as if she mattered. One night, as rain drummed against the roof and the fire burned low, Silas spoke without looking at her. "You can stay," he said, "as long as you want. This doesn't have to be temporary." Her heart tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of the choice. "I don't know if I'm ready to decide forever," she admitted. He nodded once. "That's fair. I won't rush you." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, the cabin held steady, warm and bright against the dark. For the first time since leaving home, Constance felt something fragile and powerful take root. Hope. The first sign that the outside world had not forgotten Constance came on a gray morning in late summer. Silas returned from checking his far traps later than usual, his shoulders tense in a way she had learned to recognize. He set his rifle by the door and stood there for a long moment, listening as if the mountains themselves were speaking to him. "Someone's been on the lower trail," he said finally. Constance looked up from the table where she was sorting dried herbs. "A hunter?" "No." His jaw tightened. "Too careless, too many tracks, and they doubled back." The safety she had grown used to wavered, just slightly, not shattered, but tested. That evening, Silas told her the parts he had never spoken aloud. Years before, when he first came west, he had briefly settled near a rail survey camp. The railroad wanted the passes Silas knew better than any map, and when he refused to guide them through sacred land and unstable slopes, they tried another tactic: accusations, a forged claim, a whispered rumor that he was violent, unstable, dangerous. "I left before it could turn ugly," he said. "But men like that don't forget what they think they're owed." Constance listened quietly, fingers folded in her lap. Then she took a breath. "There's something I haven't told you either." He looked at her, steady, waiting. "When my parents died, there was a dispute over my inheritance," she said. "Most of it went to my brothers, but my mother left me something separate. Land deeds, Not here, south, near the river valleys. I kept them hidden because I was afraid. Afraid someone would take them from me once they saw how easily people dismissed me." Silas said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded. "That kind of paper brings trouble," he said, "especially to a woman alone." 2 days later, trouble found them. Hoofbeats echoed up the slope just after noon. 3 riders appeared near the tree line, hard men in clean coats, one of them carrying a leather satchel stamped with a railroad mark. Silas stepped outside, rifle in hand, but lowered. "You're on private land," he called. "Turn around." The man in front smiled thinly. "We're looking for Silas Blackwood." "You found him." Their eyes slid past Silas toward the doorway. "And the woman," the man added, "the school teacher, the one who caused trouble down in Ashford's mill." Constance felt the old fear rise, but this time it didn't freeze her. "She's my wife's concern now," Silas said calmly, though they were not yet married. "You don't speak her name." The railroad man shrugged. "Town says she's cursed, caused sickness, fires, bad luck follows her." Silas's rifle lifted an inch. "That's your last warning." The men exchanged glances. They hadn't expected resistance this firm, not from one man, no matter his size. "We'll be back," the leader said, "and next time we'll bring papers." They rode off, leaving churned earth behind them. That night, Constance didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the table, unfolding her documents, smoothing the creases with careful hands. When Silas joined her, she met his eyes without apology. "I won't run again," she said, "not because of my body, not because of their fear." Silas placed his hand over hers, large and warm. "Good," he said, "because this time you won't stand alone." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of hooves that were not yet gone for good. They came just before dawn. Constance sensed it before she heard it. The way the forest fell unnaturally quiet, the fire snapping too loud in the hearth, the air holding still as if the mountains themselves were bracing. Silas was already awake, seated by the door, rifle across his knees. "They're here," he said softly. Hooves scraped against stone outside. A lantern swung, casting warped shadows across the cabin walls. Then came the knock, hard, deliberate, meant to wake fear rather than ask permission. Silas rose and opened the door before they could knock again. 4 men stood there now, not 3. The railroad agent from before, a sheriff Constance recognized from Ashford's mill, and 2 armed escorts. The sheriff's gaze slid immediately to Constance, lingering with open contempt. "There she is," he said. "The cursed one." Silas stepped forward, placing himself squarely between them and her. "You don't speak," he said. "Not unless I ask you to." The agent cleared his throat. "We have legal business. This land lies within a future rail corridor, and the woman," he nodded toward Constance, "is wanted for questioning regarding unrest and illness in Ashford's mill." Constance stood then. Her knees trembled, but she stood anyway, her presence filling the cabin just as fully as Silas's did. She stepped to his side, not behind him. "I was accused without proof," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "No warrant, no doctor, no evidence, only fear." The sheriff sneered. "Your kind always says that." Silas moved faster than thought. In one motion, he had the sheriff pinned against the cabin wall, rifle pressed to his chest, boots lifting clear of the ground. "She is under my protection," Silas said, voice low and absolute, "and this is the last time anyone comes for her." The other men froze. They had expected a bluff. This was not one. Constance stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on Silas's arm, not to stop him, but to steady him. "Look at me," she said to the railroad agent. "I am not a curse. I am a teacher. I am a landowner, and I will not be erased because it's convenient." She pulled the folded deeds from her pocket and held them up. "These lands are legally mine, filed, witnessed. If you want them, you'll have to face a court that doesn't rely on superstition." The agent's face hardened. He had not expected this woman, large, quiet, dismissed, to speak with such clarity. Silas released the sheriff, who stumbled back, gasping. "You leave," Silas said, "now, or you don't leave at all." They left. Lanterns vanished down the trail. Hoofbeats faded into the early light. Inside the cabin, silence returned, but it was different now, heavier, charged. Constance's hand shook once the danger passed. Silas turned to her, concern etched deep into his face. "You were brave," he said. "So were you," she replied. "But I won't let you fight alone any more." He cupped her face gently, reverently. "Then we fight together." Outside, the sun crested the mountains, spilling gold across the clearing. That evening, the cabin glowed like a living thing against the darkening forest. Firelight spilled through the windows, steady and warm, pushing back the long blue shadows that gathered among the trees. Inside, the scent of bread baking mingled with pine smoke, and the quiet was no longer fragile. It was earned. Constance sat at the table, her papers neatly stacked, the deeds no longer hidden or folded in fear. For the first time since her arrival in Oregon, she felt the weight of her own name settled properly on her shoulders, not as an accusation, but as a truth. Silas worked near the hearth, repairing a strap on his rifle. His movements were slower than usual, thoughtful. The violence of the morning had passed, but its meaning had not. "They'll try again," Constance said quietly. "Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even this year. But men like that don't stop wanting what they think belongs to them." Silas nodded. "I know." She looked at him, really looked at him, the scarred hands, the steady posture, the man who had chosen the mountains not out of loneliness, but out of principle. "I don't want to hide any more," she said. "Not here, not anywhere." He set the rifle aside and crossed the room, stopping in front of her. For a moment he said nothing. Then he spoke, each word deliberate. "Then don't." He took her hands, his grip firm but gentle, grounding. "This cabin," he continued, "was built to withstand winter, storms, men who don't respect boundaries. But it was never meant to be a fortress for one person alone." The fire popped softly behind him. "It can be more," he said, "if you'll have it, not just shelter, a home." Constance felt tears rise, not the sharp, humiliating kind she'd cried in the town square, but something warmer, something closer to release. "I was called a curse," she said, "told my presence ruined everything." Silas's thumb brushed over her knuckles, slow and steady. They were wrong. She exhaled, a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. Outside, wind moved through the pines, but the cabin did not shudder. It stood firm, rooted deep, like the life quietly forming within its walls. They sat together by the fire after supper, shoulders touching, not speaking much. Words felt unnecessary. The world beyond the mountains still existed. Railroads, towns, judgment, hunger for power. None of it had vanished, but neither had they. And this time, Constance was not standing alone in the center of a crowd. She was seated beside a man who did not see her as something to endure, explain, or excuse, but as someone worth choosing, worth defending, worth building a future with. The fire burned low, the night pressed close, and somewhere between the steady crackle of wood and the quiet strength of shared silence, a life began to take shape, unfinished, uncertain, but real. Every time a story like this is told, it travels farther than mountains and towns ever could. It crosses years, borders, and lives that may never meet, yet still recognize one another in moments of fear, courage, and quiet hope. Constance's story is not only about the cruelty of superstition or the strength of love. It is about dignity, about what happens when one person refuses to accept the lie that someone else is less worthy because they are different. If this story reached you, then you are part of that journey. I would love to know where you are listening from today. What city, what country, what corner of the world carried these words to you? And if you still believe that kindness can stand against ignorance, that love can grow even in the harshest places, stay with me. The next story is waiting, and it may speak to your heart just as quietly and just as powerfully.